All right.
Here we are.
We are a go.
We're back. Good to be here with you, Torian.
You too,
Talking about
Jonathan.
talking about life, talking about
All the good stuff.
all the good stuff.
So today I wanted to talk about trust.
Sounds good to me.
And I was thinking earlier today, if I could go back in time and explain my younger self, explain one thing to my younger self.
Hmm.
My first thought was like, oh, of course I'll explain about meditation. But when I thought about it as no, I would explain trust. Trust is the one thing that I would, if I met one person once and I can only teach them one thing, it would be trust. I think trust is the greatest and easiest agent of change and tranquility in a person's life. And whenever I've had a problem that I couldn't solve, and those are like the big ones, like when you have a problem you can't solve, when you can't figure out what the solution is, trust always solves it. So trust is the only thing I've ever found that will solve any issue instantly. And that's pretty incredible.
I
And I
got a
think,
question. I got a question for you then. Like,
yeah,
so so does trust? How does trust answer it instantaneously, or does it take time to like find that peace or that whatever
well,
you
the
call it?
moment you trust, you are free. But you may have to, but that may only be one moment, right? Because if
Hmm.
you haven't cultivated it, then you'll soon be going away from trust again. But you can, if you decide to, if you have an intention, you can cultivate trust. And I would say trust is one of the things that is the most key thing to making your energy rise up and for your energy to vibrate on a high level. And when your energy vibrates on a high level, that's when you feel good, and that's when good things come to you.
What's happened in your life lately to that you have felt that trust, or that you have been trusting in something big or something small?
Well, it's just generally whenever I start worrying about the future or about a certain thing, or like in my relationship, if I'm like, oh, am I supposed to do something here? Am I supposed to change anything? Am I supposed to change who I am? Am I supposed to go against the current? Just have to remind myself that no, I just have to trust. Everything is going to go exactly the way it needs to if I trust. Now, be trusting doesn't mean it's going to go the way I want to. That's not what it means at all. But it means things are happening exactly the way they should and the way they need to.
Mm. Okay, so what I'm hearing is you're trusting in whatever is unfolding is meant to be happening in that, whether it's you in the
You,
relation or you in the situation that you're in or whatever it is.
the highest trust is not in something, it's just trust. But one of the ways you can explain it is that you could say that you're trusting that everything's going to be all right, but everyone knows we're going to die. So clearly things are not going to be all right. We know that for a fact.
Maybe that's also all right to have, like, to die, right?
Mm.
I don't know. I'm just saying. I'm just saying out loud. Like it's maybe not for some people.
Yeah, for some people it's a good thing. For some people it's the end of pain, right? But for other people it's unfinished business to suddenly die for most people. But trust is trust is an interesting thing because real trust can't really be broken. If I trust you, for example, and you betray me, and my trust is broken, that's a kind of it's a flimsy kind of trust. Because if I was truly trusting, then I would trust for the sake of trust, because trusting is one of the highest things in existence. It's one of the best things you can have. So if I trust you, I don't trust you because I trust you to not cheat me. I trust you because trusting is a beautiful thing. I trust you because it's much more beautiful to trust you than it is to not trust you. And whether you betray my trust or not, that's not really my problem. You know what I mean?
But that trust or that energy that you give is like that. Like that's what you're.
Trusting, trusting, if we're getting right down to it, trusting is giving your mind permission to turn off.
What do you
Because the
mean by
mind
that?
says, how do I prevent this from happening? And you say, well, I'm just gonna trust. And the mind say, well, I don't know what that means. And I said, well, I'm just gonna trust anyway. So trust goes directly into no mind, into meditation or awareness or enlightenment or whatever you want to call it. If you have trust, you don't have any reason to think. If you think, that's because you don't trust, right? Every kind of thinking is trying to figure out, to try and avoid something happening or to try to make something happen.
Mm.
Thinking comes from a desire to control. Trust simply means, well, I'm not going to control, I'm just going to trust. And some people trust in God, some people trust in themselves, some people trust in different things. And it's okay to trust in different things, but trust is just trust, basically. Just trust that everything is exactly as it needs to be. Everything is going to be exactly as it needs to be. Wherever you end up, that's where you need to be. You could say that there is a, just like some people, some religious people say, well, there's a meaning with everything, and God works in mysterious ways, and that's fine. But just trust. Trust is the absurd decision to just stop worrying about anything for no reason at all. And it doesn't make sense, but it makes you happy. And what makes you happy makes the highest sense.
And it makes you free, perhaps
It makes you
free
free.
from the mind.
And the interesting thing is, the more free from the mind you are, the more intelligent you are, and the more likely things are to go the right way, because now you're actually paying attention to the world. And it's much easier to take the right decisions when you're not completely distracted by your mind all the time and not seeing what's in front of you. If you're seeing what's in front of you, then it's very easy to see, oh, is this the path to take or is it not the path to take? But if your consciousness is all obfuscated and entangled with thinking and doubting and fear and worry, it's very, very difficult to see anything clearly, because you're not in your senses, you're not in the world. And there are so many, the mind is a worrying machine. So no matter how many times you try to figure it all out or make a plan or create a model of the world or a theory or whatever, the mind is always going to find some reason to doubt, some reason to worry. It will always do that. You cannot stop it. Because within logic, there's always a reason to worry. There's always a logical or rational reason to be worried or to do more or to protect yourself more against fear or things going wrong or whatever. But trust is not rational. Trust is irrational. It's absurd. Trust makes no sense. So it just short circuits your mind. Your mind just flits out instantly. You just become a happy idiot, just going where the world takes you. And that's what you should be doing anyway, because that's the natural way, right? That's, if you talk about Taoism and the Tao, which is called the way, which is kind of like this energy that flows through the universe. And when you oppose it, life becomes very difficult. You're trying to swim upstream. When you go with it, life is very easy because you're aligning with, you're harmonizing with what is. So, for example, I could give an example of how trust is. Like, for example, in my relationships, if I don't trust and my partner does something, and maybe I'm like, oh, that's not a that's a she just did a bad thing, or I'm worried about that. I need to fix that. And then I try to talk to her about it, and I tell her, oh, you should fix that, blah blah. And then she starts resisting because she feels like I'm trying to change her. And so she becomes even more enmeshed in her mind. And this behavior she has, which it might be a bad behavior, but this behavior she can feel me resisting it, and then she starts resisting it, and then it's energized more, and then it becomes harder to get rid of. But if I just in the moment I'm like, okay, well, this may be an issue, but I'm just gonna trust. Then what happens is now I'm not resisting that behavior in her. So she feels no pressure to get rid of it. She feels no resistance. And if we stay together, we're both trusting more and more. Our energy is elevated. And what happens to all these low consciousness mechanisms when our energy is elevated? They're just slowly vibrated out. They just disappear. Because the more energetic you become, the better you feel. And the more these low energetic things, they just don't feel like you anymore. They just kind of vibrate themselves out. It's like if you've been eating healthy for a long time and suddenly you have a cheeseburger, you're gonna feel like shit because the energy of the cheeseburger is just no longer compatible with the energy level you're on most of the time, and your mind is the same way. Healthy mind food and unhealthy mind food feels very different.
So healthy mind food equals trust.
Exactly. And then if you do have to have that conversation with your partner because it's a problem at some point, then if you don't trust, you'll take up the discussion when you feel it's relevant for you. You're resisting your own ego, and that's the worst way to do it. If you're trusting, one day you'll just bring it up naturally when it feels right and when it makes sense. When the Tao, when the great way or the great ocean is flowing your way. And then you can bring it up and then it's fine, there's no problem, it's whatever, because you don't need to do it right now. You
Mm.
gave it space to breathe because you trusted, and then there was a time. And like we said in an early episode, often if you give your partner time or you give the world time, because this is true on all levels, the solution bubbles up on its own.
The great paradox.
The great paradox: the more you try to fix something, the more fucked up it gets.
And this trust is like the opposite of that, right? Like the less you try and fix, or the more you kind of trust, believe, have faith, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, trust is the
Things
medicine for fear.
Trust is the medicine for fear. I like that. You reckon when you're talking about this trust, do you reckon in religions people talk about it as faith? Because that's what, like, sometimes when you're talking about this now, that's what I hear. It's like a faith kind of thing.
Sometimes I think it's the same thing, but
Yeah.
I think most religions have it sort of, they have a lot of impurities in it. There's a lot of stuff mixed in. I think
Yeah.
rarely do religions talk about pure faith, which is
Mm.
just like faith and
Trust.
faith, trust and trust. Yeah.
Trust and trust. Pure trust.
But if you truly believe that God's got everything under control and he has a point with everything, it ends up the same way. But you have to truly believe it. Because otherwise your mind is not gonna start winding down because your mind is a pleasure seeking and a pain avoiding machine.
And that's
So
like also reinforced in society, right? Getting
oh
rid of
yeah,
pain. You can't have like the bad stuff, right? Or talk about the
yeah,
bad stuff, or and there's becomes less and less space for it. So we try and avoid it more and more, and then we get it more and more, right? Like amplifies.
yeah.
And what I'm hearing with this trust is like kind of cutting through all this, just like a. Um, I kind of, when you're talking about it in this way, I'm kind of reminded of when I used to travel a lot. Used to go there was this one period of time where I traveled around the world for like a year and a half. Went to, I think, like something like 40 or 50 countries. And I remember there was a time in the traveling, and if you're like a seasoned traveler, you know this kind of point in time. Maybe if you're not as well, and there was a point in time where like it became irrelevant to like kind of plan too much stuff. It just became very much like kind of people say it's going with the flow, or people say whatever it is. But it was very much about like kind of living from the moment that I was in, with the people that I was in, with the country or the culture or the whatever. And I remember that time was very much about like trusting. It was very much about trusting in the unknown. You have no idea what's going to come up that day or the next day or whatever, or who you're going to meet or what you're going to experience or whatever's going
And
to
that was
happen.
joyful, right?
That was super joyful. That was like that gave so much life energy to me and other people, and it's very like kind of like how you were talking about. It's like raising the energetic level, and literally that's what I was like living for like a year or something. It was just day by day, just trusting in things, the way unfolding, like trusting in where I was going to go, who I was going to meet, or and not knowing, just being really open to that, and coming back to every day, just kind of like going, I trust in, I fully believe in, I'm going to like, who knows, but we'll just see what happens. And that was like a really magical way of being of through the in the world, and just living in those moments in my life. And as you talk about like the energy rising, I think that was encapsulated in coming from that place of trust, of openness, of allowing the way to unfold itself, and going with that. And it's yeah,
Did you
damn,
think a lot in
I
that period?
miss I miss that.
Yeah.
did I think a lot?
Yeah.
What do you mean? Like think a lot about
Like,
no,
was your mind very active in that period about like seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, worrying, all this stuff?
there was times when it was like, dangerous and stuff, right? Then it was
Mm.
very much about worry or fear. But for the most part, not really. Like it's also like a big contrary thing, because like people say like you're going to travel and find yourself and all this stuff, and figure everything out. But in actual fact, like I think what I experienced is I came very much in myself from not thinking, from not figuring stuff out, but just from being, from trusting in me and the world and everything, and living from that place. And yeah, sometimes I think it's important to to reflect and remember how important it is to come from that way of being, you could say. For example, right now in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's trust is a madman's gift in a way, because you cannot trust unless you are insane. That's kind of that's kind of how it is. Society is very clear on the fact that things go wrong because you're afraid and you stop them from going wrong. That's society's way of functioning. And to cross that threshold and say, well, I'm just going to stop worrying about things going wrong, things are probably going to be fine. At that point, you kind of step out from the group. At that point, other people will be jealous of you. They will admire you, but they will think you're utterly insane as well. Because society is kind of based on giving up freedom for comfort. And the trade off there is to give up trust for fear. And the great irony is that more things go wrong that way. And we go travel a lot. What happens is everything around us keeps changing. And so the only place that we find where we can place ourselves is in ourselves,
Hmm.
in the moment, whatever. So we're called to our center, we're called to the moment, and that's why most people who have traveled have a self-confidence that most other people don't, because they've experienced being in a place where the only thing they had were themselves, and they still somehow made it. And they were faced with problems, but they still somehow got through it. So a lot of people get a lot of confidence from traveling, because that's traveling means that everything except you changes all the time. And so naturally that's a centering thing for most people. Of course, some people they just freak out. Depends on where you're coming from, where you land. Um,
But even the people who freak out after some time of traveling or some time of being in this constant change, which we're all in actually, like in everyday life, it's
mm,
just it's more comfortable and it's less obvious. Um, but even those people, right, find a peace in themselves, a center, a place of knowing, a place of um, yeah, truth or like yeah, I like you said, like the confidence, right?
one of the
But I
reasons
think
why
confidence is like a pretty small word. Like I think it's more than confidence. There's like a knowing of self. There's like a
it's trust, right? It's
yeah,
self trust.
it's self trust. Yeah, go with that.
In Denmark, though, in Danish, the word for self confidence is selvtillid, which means self trust, and that's kind of a better word than confidence, right? Self
Yeah.
trust. That's why, like, a lot of people, I always notice in my life, you people are talking about like trust and oh, this person betrayed me or whatever. I've never ever felt like anyone betrayed me, but the reason is like I trust myself. So no one is ever like I'm not worried about what other people do. Like of course it would suck if my best friend suddenly left, but I trust myself. I'll be fine. I know myself. I'll find new ones, you know?
Mm.
I'm never worried about that stuff. Everyone's just gonna do their own thing, you know?
It's interesting this because like I think sometimes people have said like, you know what, Jonathan, you're a bit too trusting
Yeah.
or like too maybe not too, but like see the good in others, right? And sometimes people defy that and do wrong, right? But either way, that doesn't take away my belief in others and myself, and like coming from that place, or and because like the thing is, um, people can do wrong to you, people can do harm to you, and break trust and all this kind of stuff. And sometimes people go sour on that, and then it's like they stop trusting or whatever. But the trust that we're talking goes kind of beyond that in a way of, because we're talking about trust as trust, not in like trust in other people or all this other stuff. It's like that, like you were saying, trust in trust, and that can't be broken. Like that's something that's pure, right? So that's an important thing to kind of like hold or be with, that idea or concept, um, and just kind of absorb that or reflect on that or be in that kind of coming from that place. So I just wanted to kind of add that to the mix.
Yeah. And it's a trust that transcends even death. If you trust enough, it transcends even that. So even that it will protect you against if you trust enough.
It's interesting how the mind wants to like figure things out, right? Go into the future, like have this vision, have this like kind of worked out life, and like how it pulls us into that, right? Into the future, into the past, and um, and like I spend a lot of my life in the future. Like I'm very much like future oriented, right? And I think what I realize, like when I get caught up in that, is that like sometimes it feels great, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes there's fear, sometimes there's lots of pleasure in that, because I have this like kind of idea of how life's going to be and all this stuff. And sometimes people call that like visualization or whatever. And And I'm not talking about in. I'm just talking about in like a all the time kind of sense, right? And what I notice or what I kind of comes to me with that is like how much that takes away from being where I am now, being with the people I'm in, being present to everything going on in my life. It's kind of like this of like sometimes I ride my bike and this is a random one, but I ride my bike home from the train station to my home every day, and sometimes I'm just like in this like kind of just like thinking blah 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 like what happened that day or the future or this or that, and I'm like looking down and I'm not really taking in the like the surrounding. And then I like kind of like look up and I'm like, oh, like this is where I am right now, you know, and like maybe just put my attention onto the tree or the bird or what I can hear or whatever. And the other day I was riding home and I was in this like kind of like thinking about the future, right? And then something just kind of like, and I just looked up for a second and I saw the same view I see like every day. But in this moment, this was like so special. This was like the moon was like the sun was setting and you could see the moon, and there was just like this mist coming up on the hills, and it was just like it was. I'd never seen that same view so beautiful. And in that moment, I was like, you know what? I probably would have missed this if I was to keep thinking in my mind and not like look up and be present to that experience. And this is just like I guess like an example or a thing, but like how much of life do we spend in the past or in the future? How much of it do we spend in fear or in worry or not trusting or in doubt or whatever? And perhaps this trust is like a way of being free, truly free from all this stuff. Because if we are trusting wholeheartedly everything, like if this trust goes so deep in us, so and we believe it so much, right? Then then what need is there to fear? What need is there to doubt? What need is there to everything? If we just completely trust in what's going on right now, where we are, where we're meant to be, we're exactly where we are right now and in this moment, and that's perfect, and that's okay, and we are okay in that. And is that not enough?
Then the whole bike ride home can just be you at one with the world, you know?
Mm. What a different bike ride that would be, right? One where I wouldn't miss things, the nature or the beauty around me.
And one thing that's so significant is that what my mind often does and what our minds often do is it says like, well, tomorrow I have to go do this thing. And I know how this thing goes. I know how it goes every time and I know how to go through that and I don't really want to do it, right? That's how we think about it. Maybe we have to meet some person for something we don't really feel like it or whatever it is. And the mind thinks that the future is determined by the past. So it thinks that whatever things have been like, they will be like again. But trust then means if you cultivate this trust, is that you're going to say, no, I'm going to let go of that idea and I'm just going to trust. I'm not going to worry about the thing tomorrow. I'm just going to trust. Your mind is going to be like, well, it's going to be bad. You have to, why aren't we thinking about how bad it is? Well, first of all, what point in there is that, right? Second of all, what you'll find is if you start trusting, things that have always been in a certain way may turn out different. The person that has always been in a certain way, if you trust, they may be different that day. And you'll find terrifyingly that some of the things that you don't like in your life, you are recreating by holding on to how you didn't like them in the past, right? And that's a difficult thing because the ego really likes to understand the world and to label it and to categorize it. But the truth is that maintains a lot of the negative stuff in our life because you're projecting what you expect things to be, and then they usually turn out that way, especially people. Like, for example, if you think someone else is going to be angry, you can make that person angry just by, thinking they're going to be angry and by treating them as like they're going to be angry. And the same thing is true with everything else. So trust frees you from experiencing the same thing the same way over and over because now you're different. And if you're different, the situation cannot be the same. The other people cannot be the same. It's impossible. because now your whole environment, your whole atmosphere is different, and it's a psychic world. People cannot avoid your energy sphere. I mean, you may see them run away from it if they don't like it, but they can't avoid it if they're going to stay around you. So this freedom from this boredom that we have of things happening again and all this worry we have, that's what trust gives us. And more so than that is the mind is dysfunctional. We talk about that a lot. The ego is dysfunctional, but what does that mean? Well, a really good example is our ego would like to know how our lives are going to turn out, right? It would like to know everything, right? It would like to know exactly what's going to happen. And that's why it's always trying to figure it out. Because if it knew it exactly what was going to happen, it could, make some better choices or whatever. But here's the thing, the same ego would be bored to fucking death if it knew what was going to happen. And it hates knowing what's going to happen, doesn't it? So the ego seeks the very thing that it hates. And that's what we mean by the mind being dysfunctional. The mind wants to know everything, but when it does know everything, it hates it and it's bored and it wants to get to something new, right? You cannot win with this mind because it doesn't understand itself, and so it's actually creating things that it itself does not like. When you trust, it's like being on vacation. When you trust, everything is new because your eyes are new, because you're not carrying the past.
There's an openness that maybe
Yeah.
wasn't there before.
And what is that openness? Well, it's very simple. If you imagine the world is in front of you and you're behind the world, then the mind comes in between you with ideas, with interpretations, with this screen of dust and the old things. It's like a dirty window, right? But when you trust, that goes away, and suddenly the openness is that the mind is no longer between you and reality. You are just one to one, and that's what we call being in the moment. What you hear, you hear. What you see, you see. When someone talks, you hear them talking. You're not thinking about them talking. You're not interpreting them talking. You directly hear them talking. So trust removes this interpretative film or disconnection that the ego is. And that's why trust is it is a big part of awareness. It's a big part of love. It's a big part of the spiritual field. Everyone should cultivate trust because it's an antidote to the mind. And the mind is the mind is the very thing that makes life seem so mundane, because life is not mundane. And we see sometimes in small moments we get a glimpse of the beauty of life, the beauty of other people, and suddenly we're overwhelmed with joy, and we suddenly see how golden everything is. And all that is a single moment of no mind. And trust gives you no mind, because what if you trust, what is there to think about? What do you need to control? What do you need to avoid? Just trust. The bad things that are going to happen, you need those somehow. And the good things that are going to happen, they're just going to happen on their own. Trust
As
is just, an absurdity that eventually it just instantly cuts the mind. Whatever you're worried about, just trust. It's just a sword. You don't even hear it. It's just like
as you share this with me now, Torbjørn, I realize like how much right now in life, how much fear I experience in the future and not knowing. And like I notice there's this like kind of part of me, maybe coming from the past, who's like used to figuring that out, having a plan, knowing what's going to happen, expecting that, and like basically figuring out like problem solving. And it becomes very clear then, as we talk about this now and the work that I do with clients and on myself as well, how much that is coming from this like ego or the mind. And it doesn't stop, right? It's always going. Like it's
yeah,
always, and if we're not able to see it and kind of like uh, be in it in a different way, then it will just take over, because that's what it loves to do. That's what it feeds from. Right? And And I realized, like, when we're talking about this now, that no matter how much I've got a plan or I've got it figured out or whatever, like, who the fuck really knows? Like, seriously, like, you don't know what's going to really happen tomorrow, even as much as we can plan and we can have this idea and have it all figured out and everything. So then I'm like, well, what is, you know, what's, if I'm going to spend all this energy in that and still not know, can I just not come back to this place of, like, just trusting in that it will work out in the way it will work out, and I can put my energy into the things that I'm doing, and believe that that's enough, and believe that, like, where I'm going, I will get to the place that I'm going, and it's maybe not so important to have it all figured out or to know everything in years to come from now. Maybe I have an idea of where I'm going. Maybe I have a goal or whatever. But then it's coming back to just trusting and taking the steps towards that. And maybe not even. Maybe it's just trusting in, like, where, like, everything. Me, the universe, the people in my life, the family.
When you trust, that doesn't mean you're going to do something you don't want to do. On the contrary, when you trust, you are so much in yourself that that's when you will definitely pick the path.
Mm,
This ego, the fear the ego has, but if I trust, will I end up? You'll end up exactly where you want, because you'll actually be choosing moment to moment where you want to go. And you won't be stupefied by this mind that's taking 50, 60, 70% of your attention when you are in those moments where there's a choice to make and where you need the information that's in front of you. It's through a good moment now that you create a good future. There's no other way. And you are there with all your intelligence. You bring to bear your full senses, your full intelligence, your full knowledge by being in the moment without the mind. So of course you're going to make good choices. You're going to naturally go towards the things that makes your energy feel good, makes your energy rise. We've talked a lot about energy. Well, the easiest way to follow your energy is to trust. Because if you trust, then you're not going to do that thing you don't want to do. You're not going to compromise, because why would you compromise? Compromise is a bargain with the ego that if I do things I don't want to do, you're going to make sure things that I don't want to happen don't happen.
so no compromise. So then, just like,
Well, trust doesn't mean you don't compromise. Trust means that when you do compromise, you do it in a trusting way because you've seen in the situation that it calls for compromise.
hmm,
But it's not compromise that arises from your ego. It doesn't mean you live well. You will become more uncompromising in some ways, and everyone needs to be, because that's people are they're majorly here to be themselves, not to be other things than that. But it doesn't mean you can never compromise. It just means
when you do it, you're
you
coming from a
you
place
do it with
of,
your whole heart because you
yeah,
want to,
yeah,
because it makes sense. You
hmm,
compromise out of love, not out of fear. Because certainly life has many compromises.
follow the love. It's such a key thing, right? Like, to make choices from that place, that trusting, that loving place inside ourselves, and not from fear.
The ego tells us that it will bring us wealth, but the truth is, you know what true wealth is? Well, you do know what true wealth is. True wealth is trust, right? A person who has
Freedom.
trust, a person who has trust has freedom, has everything. A person who has trust is rich. And people who have everything in the world, when they meet such a person, that is very painful for them, because they see someone who is truly rich, who is truly wealthy, while they have everything except the one thing that matters. They don't have trust, they don't have peace, they don't have freedom.
feel like this is like a point in like this conversation where perhaps it could be an idea to like look at your own life
Yeah.
and ask like, what is the things that I'm fearing? What is the things that I'm like worrying about a lot, or that I'm doubting in my life or in other people or in where I'm going and all this kind of stuff, and come to this these questions in a from a place of what we've been talking about today, or from that energy of trusting and seeing like, can I, not only can I, but like, do I choose to kind of come from that place in these things? Can I work with those things in a way of cultivating this trust? So when fear does come up, when doubt comes up, when worry comes up, can I look into that worry or look into that fear, um, or look into the ego, you could say, and come from this trusting place and believe in that and allow that to kind of shine, or allow that energy to be there, and just see what happens, see what difference that makes. I mean, think about how much pain and how much suffering, right, people go through in their lives, how much they're caught up in their mind with these things. I know in my life, I've been like that a lot, right? And then I'm like, fuck, like if I was only just fully trusting in myself or in the world or in itself, how much time, how much pain, how much suffering could have that taken from those moments?
Yeah, like whoever you are listening to this right now, you're here now, aren't you? You made it to this point. So every worry you had up until now was pointless because you made it here. You made it.
You are here.
You're here right now. So what was all that fear? What about that fear? And some might say, well, if I hadn't been afraid, I wouldn't have done anything. But it's not true. In fact, what makes most people lazy or passive is what we call paralysis by analysis. If you keep having to think, you just end up not taking any action because you're so overwhelmed by the fact that an infinite amount of things could happen. It's impossible to think your way to anything. And so some people have to use fear to get themselves going, the fear of something not happening that motivates them. And it's true that that motivates you, but it's you're telling your body that you're constantly in danger of dying. That's how
Hmm.
you're getting things done. You have no happiness in those moments, and it wears on your body. And sure, sometimes that can put you into flow. If you're scared enough, that gets you to do something that puts you in flow temporarily. But it means you, on one side of that flow, you're scared of dying. On the other side of that flow, you're going to be scared again.
Yeah.
And
So
you've depended.
what that's the cost of that, right? Like that's it.
That's the cost of it. And the same, and if you would just trust instead, you would be in flow all the time. And you wouldn't lose all your energy on thinking, and then you actually have energy to do things and you'll feel like doing them. Suddenly you're walking around your apartment, you're in a good mood, and you're like, hey, I want to clean a little bit, and you clean. And this thing, like cleaning, was something you were so worried about because you had to get it done and you didn't have time. There were so many other things. But because you let go of it and you trusted and you allowed yourself to just be free, suddenly you have energy to do all those things that you didn't have energy to do because you were worried about them. It costs a lot to worry about things and it gives you nothing. And trust, you like you're the thing you have to understand is that your mind is not necessary. It's like a computer on top of a computer. When you feel cold, you'll know to put on warmer clothes. When you're hungry, you'll know to eat. You don't have to think about it. You already have, your brain already works everything out. Your mind is just this talking voice on top of it that complicates everything. And if you meet someone who's not good for you, you'll know that your brain knows this kind of stuff. But then you think, oh, I have to be a good person, and you ignore the signals everywhere that you shouldn't be dealing with this person. And then 2 or 3 weeks, 2 or 3 months, 2 or 3 years down the line, you greatly regret not listening to your initial intuition because now there's so much problems in your life because of this person who didn't feel good to begin with. But you didn't trust it. You didn't trust. You didn't trust yourself. You didn't trust your natural intelligence until you start thinking and stuff. Everything goes wrong out of this thinking. Of course, thinking is great if you thinking is of course a beautiful thing as a tool you want to build. You're going to build a house or something, then thinking is great. But that's for planning. That's for figuring stuff out. That's a creative kind of thinking, right? It's very different from worrying, or that's using your mind as a tool. That's fine, but that's 1% of your day. 99% of your day, you don't need it.
And it's and yet we like try and use that same kind of like way of using the brain on our emotions or our thoughts. Like you
Right.
said, 99% of the days is not planning, is not looking at numbers, is not figuring things out, unless you do that for your work, right?
Mm.
Um, but yet we spend that time problem solving in our head, right? Trying to figure things out, and it just uses a shitload of energy, right? And how far does it get us? How much energy does it give us? Not a lot.
Yeah.
How much pain does it cause? Quite a lot, usually. um,
And think about it this way. If something bad's going to happen, how would you rather have it happen? Do you want 2 weeks of worrying, being put to your knees by your worries and anxiety, and then finally that bad thing happens and you're like, oh, finally release, and you have to focus it? Or you just feel super good, and one day something bad happens and you have all the good feeling of those 2 weeks of just feeling good to bear against the bad thing because you're feeling good all the time. Now a bad thing happens. Well, whatever, you have surplus energy. You trust yourself. So even if something bad's gonna happen, the trust you've had up until that point is gonna make that thing much easier to deal with because you've been in a good place. You have energy. It's like having a good night's sleep. You can just deal with life better when you sleep, and it's harder when you don't. And trust is the same thing. It's just letting your mind sleep, and then it's useful for when you need it. Trust, love, and awareness. Those are the big ones. That's the spiritual path. That's the way to peace. That's the way to happiness. That's the way to truth, to God, to enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. You can pick one. You can play with all of them. But those are the big ones: love, trust, and awareness. And they're very close to each other because you cannot love without also being aware. And if you trust, you become aware. And if you are aware, you will love more and you will trust more. Because all those three things have one thing in common, and that is that they silence the mind. When you love, you don't think very much. When you trust, you don't think very much. When you're aware, you don't think very much. And they're all different shades, they're facets of the same diamond. Is when you go on that path, whatever path you follow, the two other come as a side effect. You become more aware, you'll also love more and you'll trust more. You can't help it because if you're more aware, you're going to think less. If you're going to think less, then you're worrying less, so you're going to trust more. And you're going to love more as well, because what stops us from loving is all this interpretation, is looking at other people and thinking all these things. Because if you look and you don't think all these things, then you just see yourself in another person, and that's love. And you see yourself in a dog and in a cat, that's love. And eventually you see yourself in a tree and in a blade of grass, and that's love.
and then eventually you see love in everything.
Yeah.
The whole world.
Trust is such a trust is such a simple and an easy thing. Of course, when you start trusting, a lot of fear is going to come up. And for most people, you're going to have to go through a kind of death when you start doing it because all the fear is going to come up. But that's just your ego dying. If you just allow that and keep trusting, just allow the fear to come up, go through that death, then you go into a deeper level because a part of your ego disappears, and then you start to become more trusting, you're more happy, you're more free. And you start to glow a little in this world because trusting people are so few. But you don't lose your intelligence. It doesn't mean trusting doesn't mean that if someone makes you feel like they are not trustworthy, then you should trust them anyway. Trust just means do what feels right to you in the moment. And an interesting thing is sometimes trusting someone who is not trustworthy can give them a chance to choose to be trustworthy. Sometimes trust can give other people trust in themselves if you trust them first. So sometimes it's a good thing to trust someone who isn't trustworthy because sometimes a good person is made when a bad person is trusted. Because in their usual habits of doing bad things, there is a split second where there is an option of like, hey, this person trusts me. I could just honor their trust.
Mm. They
Because
see you.
even bad people feel bad about breaking trust because it doesn't feel good.
Mm. And maybe that when you do that, you see the other person, and maybe not in a way that they see themselves. And in that
Exactly.
moment, you give them an opportunity, you give them an opening, and
You give
maybe
them
their
a
whole
new
life
version of themselves.
changes. And you don't know how much that can mean to other people when they are
Yeah.
maybe going down a bad route or whatever. Like maybe they're in a dark place in their life, and when you see them in that way, you see them in that light, and you give them that trust, it can change so much in somebody's life. I personally received that in my life, and I think we all know that feeling when we're being seen, truly trusted.
I've heard so many stories of people who got into the bad sides of life until they found someone who trusted them and then they got out that way. And they're always so thankful to this person because without them it would never have happened because everyone else was just confirming to them that they were a bad person. But there was one person who was like, you're not a bad person, you just got into some bad things. And that gave them a new way to see themselves and that gave them a way out. And that's a very enriching thing for both people involved.
Definitely. I think each one of us have that ability or that gift that we can give to the people in our lives or people maybe we don't know yet or whoever it is in your life, right? To give them that space, that opportunity to be seen, to be trusted. And it's a
And it allows you to see
big thing
through
to
the
do.
bad things as well.
Yeah. And maybe not it's not to like say that they don't exist. Like you
Mm.
acknowledge it as there, but you see the person for who they are. You see them truly.
It's not a naive way, it's just seeing and trusting exactly it. You see what is.
Mm.
You don't lose anything from trusting. You lose your head, but you didn't really need it to begin with. You know,
we
when
could all do
Jesus
with
was on the huh?
I was just saying we could all do with a bit more of losing our losing our mind.
Yeah. I'm reminded that when Jesus was on the cross, now I'm not entirely sure how Christians interpret this, but as I understand it personally, when Jesus was on the cross, that was when he truly started to trust. When he was up there on the cross and he said, you know, not my will, but thy will be done. That's when he truly surrendered to God. Even when things were looking bad, he said, you know, I trust, you know, what you're doing. I trust what's going on. And I think that was the moment that I consider Jesus to have been enlightened, not really before that. At that moment where he was like, I trust the way of things. Trust, you know. Until then, his trust was a little conditional, but at that moment, I think he surrendered completely.
Mm.
And you know,
That's
as we
that's
know
a,
how the story goes, you know, Jesus got out of there somehow. He did survive and was gone, you know, 3 days later. So he was even taken out of that. But even if he hadn't been saved, it doesn't really matter because that kind of trust is enough to take you safely anywhere. Even death is not enough to destroy that kind of trust.
it's also you hear a lot of stories about like when people are on like their deathbed, right? just before they leave, and they come, and there's this like kind of lightness about them.
Yeah.
There's this kind of like surrendering to life, knowing that they're going to go, and fully just accepting that, or like kind of surrendering to that. Literally trusting whatever's going to happen is going to happen, and they're open to that. I think that's like, you don't have to wait till you're on your deathbed to choose to come from that place.
Yeah, and many people have near death experiences and they come back and they say, everything's all right.
Hmm.
You know, you don't have to worry. But you don't need a near death experience to have that.
It's going to
You
be
can
okay.
die. You can die now. You can trust now. You can die to the past. You can die to the future. You can trust now. And all it takes is just, if you have a willingness to do so, cultivate that trust. When the mind says, and what about this? What about that? You just say, well, I trust.
You know what?
It's like
I'm gonna
it's like
take that.
arguing with a madman. You can't do anything because the person is mad. What will you say?
I'm gonna personally, Torben, take that upon myself for the
Do that.
next week. This is my personal thing for the next week to really trust in like what's happening right now.
Perhaps
And
we can talk about how that what week was for you in a week, if you want to. You
yeah,
can explore that.
or the next episode.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think people would like
Well,
that.
shit, now I've got to do it.
Yeah, now you have to.
See what wild ride that takes me on.
In all likelihood,
Yeah.
it'll take you the exact same ride if you hadn't trusted, except you just won't be agonizing over it, right?
Hmm.
And maybe you'll be a little smarter in some cases because you're trusting. That's it.
Well, life will show me the way, and we'll see. Um, I really enjoyed this, Torben. Thank you for sharing your energy today in this recording.
I'm
Um,
always enjoying it as usual. So right back at you.
and for everyone like listening in, we hope that you also experience the energy in this, and you get something from this, and you know learn something, and you can give like apply something in your life about trusting. Well, today we talked a lot about that, right? But whatever resonated for you, whatever you kind of felt connected to or energized by, follow that, and trust that. You know,
Trust and energy.
trust in energy. That's an opening for the next next podcast. Is there anything you would like to share with our community before signing off today, Toby?
There's a famous spiritual teacher called Ramana Maharshi he was well known for self-inquiry and for self-abiding. And he said something like, you and I aren't different. I have just placed all my worries on God's shoulders. I just trust. That's the only difference. Whenever I have any baggage, I just put it on God's train and he takes care of it. That's all. That's the only difference. I just trust my worries with God. So last time we finished the podcast saying love and do what you will, but I think I would personally say just trust and do what you want.
Trust and do what comes to you. And so that's a beautiful way of encapsulating this conversation. So,
Well, I guess I'll see you on the trail then.
see you on the trail.